magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. There's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life. Hello and welcome to SassafrasCast, a podcast full of witchy insights to help you lead your sassiest life. I am Rorie Kelly, a tarot reader, singer-songwriter, and all-around personal growth nerd from Long Island, New York. In just a moment, we will begin the Witchy Weather Report. But first, a shout out to my patrons. If you didn't know, you can support this podcast at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 a month or more. I record these episodes live, and my patrons get a private YouTube link before each one, so they can tune in for the live recording. We just messed that up today. I sent them a link that was literally private, and no one could view it but me. But it's fixed now, and we're all here. If you would like to do this, hang out in the chat, ask questions, and get them answered in real time, you can join me at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot. Patrons also get access to my Discord server where we talk about all things witchy and wonderful, and a shout out in each episode. Here we go. Thank you, Russ Green, Amanda Little, Patty Bell from soulshepherd.love, Melissa Marie, Rachel Miller, Antifragile Tarot, Grayson, Savannah Tillett, hi Savannah, B from Whimsical Solace, Millie Orozco, Ruby Marchetti, Brittany, and Hannah Westlock. I'm so grateful you're in my world. Thank you. Yay! All right, if you are watching on video, you have likely already noticed that I have a guest with me today. This episode of SassafrasCast features Susannah from Antifragile Tarot. Susannah has been reading tarot and podcasting like a little bit longer than me on both accounts. It's like Susannah started doing it and I was like, oh, me too, because Susannah's really cool and made it look fun. So I'm really excited to have Susannah here. She is also a reader. She's also a podcaster. Some of you may know her podcast, which is Antifragile Tarot. And that is also the name of her tarot Etsy shop, which is currently on hiatus, but hopefully not forever. Maybe forever. No one would fault you for being a human with a life.
Well,
so
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
I appreciate you being here too. I'm delighted to have, this is my second ever guest on the podcast, and I'm super excited about it. And we are going to do, because we're both tarot readers, we're going to do the Witchy Weather Report together. We are both going to pull a card for you, and we are both reading from the Raven's Prophecy Tarot, which is a tarot by Maggie Stiefvater, who is an author and artist and wrote a series of books that Susannah and I both really like called The Raven Prophecy something or other. It's not Raven Prophecy, it's The Raven Cycle.
The Raven
books.
Cycle.
Right. There's ravens involved, is what I'm trying to tell you. Anyway, it's a great book series, and then we both found out like that she had done a tarot deck kind of inspired by some of the imagery in the series, and we're like, because we're fangirls. And so we're both going to be reading from that deck today for you, for the Witchy Weather Report. I will also let you know, we had a new moon in Leo about a week ago, and Leo season is a good time for thinking about visibility and thinking about celebrating yourself. And if you're like me, you're always behind on new moons and full moons. I certainly am. If anyone has an intention for this month that involves any of those Leo things or doesn't, drop it in the chat. I want to know your intentions. I think my only intention is to make it through August alive. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm shuffling right now. I actually was just watching another tarot reader's YouTube channel, and one of the things that he specifically mentioned was, oh, you know, you might not want to do like the poker style shuffle on camera because it's like a very loud shuffle. And I'm like, that's why I like it. I love the loud shuffle. So I'm shuffling noisily. Susannah, I think, is shuffling more politely. And we're each going to pull a card.
I'm not good at the poker style shuffle, and then it messes my cards up. And I'm like, we're just gonna do this.
See, and I'm not very good at that shuffle. I feel like I am pretty. I just don't do a good job. I just kind of like circle the cards around themselves, and it doesn't do a lot to randomize them. Savannah says, "Love hearing the shuffle. Thank you for your validation, Susannah. Not Susanna, Savannah. Y'all have rhyming names. And one of you's in the chat, and one of you's here, and I'm bad at life." If you are listening not live, thank you so much for tuning into SassafrasCast. Did you know there is a video version now of SassafrasCast available on my YouTube channel, which you can find by searching Sassafras Tarot on YouTube? And that's because I don't have a vanity URL yet, so please, my goodness, please subscribe on YouTube, because if I get enough followers, that's when I'm allowed to be like youtube.com/Sassafras Tarot. So far, not yet. Suze, are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, I am almost ready. 1, 2, 3, go! What do we got here? I have the 3 of Swords. What do you have?
I have the 9 of Swords.
Oh my god, we're hilarious.
Of course I do.
And the 3 of Swords, like, a little bit is also a both of us card, I feel like. Okay, so we're very swordsy today. Susannah has several tarot cards that follow her around and has pulled one out. So what is your interpretation? Because I'm going to just throw it right into your court. What is your interpretation, Susannah, of these 2 cards together and how they fit into like a witchy weather report for the coming weeks?
Well, if we're building off of that new moon in Leo energy, where we're trying to build something that makes us proud of ourselves, something that makes us proud of other people, if we're combining the 3 of Swords and the 9 of Swords, it might be really hard right now to let go of seemingly small pains. Sometimes it's those little hurts that wind up hurting the most. You know, it's not the knockout huge fight, but it's, you know, a little bit of bickering every day that can wear away, and then that leads us to that would be the 3 of Swords. And to me, that also leads us into not being able to let go and having this undue anxiety over, well, you know, these little things are going wrong. Does that mean everything's going wrong? Am I on the wrong path? And that's where that 9 of Swords energy is coming from. So I think it's really important that we kind of take a step back from that, oh my God, one thing went wrong, the whole day is shot. Like, doesn't need to be that way. We can take that step back and remind ourselves that this is something that we have some control over how we react to.
Sounds fake, but okay.
It really does. I've taken to telling my therapist that lately. So.
I have to. I do the same with my therapist. I was just thinking, like, I've had you on the show for like a good 2 minutes and 30 seconds now, and already you have called me out through the tarot card. So thank you.
I know today you keep being like, I'm bad at life, but no, it's fine. Tech messes up. It's still going to be a great podcast.
It does. I also found out recently that I was born with Mercury in retrograde, which should mean that Mercury retrogrades are easier for me. Nope. It just means I always feel like I'm in retrograde. I'm just always backwards. So here's what I would like to add to that, because I thought it would be cool, since I'm interviewing a tarot reader today, to get 2 perspectives on the Witchy Weather Report. And the perspective I would like to share is that miscommunications and conversations where you feel like you are not on the same page, like you're saying something and the person is hearing something different than what's coming out of your mouth, and perhaps vice versa, right? If we're honest with ourselves, that a lot of these miscommunications are not about either party in the moment. You know, it's not about anyone being a jerk. It's not about how someone feels even about you necessarily, but a lot of it speaks to like the kind of nightmare energy of the 9 of Swords, which is about our triggers. You know, it's about our fears. It's about our fear stories. And sorry, I'm putting the card down because my arm is tired from holding it up.
I'm resting right on my legs, so that's why. The only reason I can hold it up.
That is wise. So I just want to put it out there that if we're experiencing that in the coming weeks, and my intention when I pull these cards for the Witchy Weather Report is always that, like, even if you're listening to this 6 months later, that it still be irrelevant, something that you can take away in your life. If we are experiencing these miscommunications where we just seem to be unable to get on the same page, and we're experiencing like hurt feelings and wondering how to get through to each other, that it likely doesn't have to actually do with the conversation in the moment. It has to do with both parties' fear stories being triggered by stuff that's going on, perhaps in the conversation, perhaps just externally, like perhaps just the context of lives. And, that is freeing in a way. It means, hey, it's not about you. It's not about the moment. It's just that everyone is human and everyone has triggers and fears, and it's okay. Let's give ourselves permission to be human. Oh my gosh. Susannah, I was like overachieving Susannah, and I was correct. And here she is like literally holding up both cards for you because I got lazy and put mine down. Anyway,
well, these cards are also just so beautiful that I felt like they deserve to be seen.
They are really gorgeous. I'll hold up the back of the deck too. So this is the Raven's Prophecy deck by Maggie Stiefvater. I'm trying to, there we go. I have a ring light, and I'm like, oh, good, ring light. That makes me more professional, but it also makes me less professional because I'm always like wiggling around, trying not to have my glasses reflect it.
Do you have a like a scarf or anything over it, like a piece of like a gauzy?
That's what I should do.
I stole one of my headscarves and used it for that, and it changed my whole game.
Yeah, I think I will do that. Thank you. See, Susannah's here for 2 minutes, and she's leveling us up. So this brings us to our topic of the day. I set up my MIDI keyboard just so I could do those little moments.
I love it. Talk about overachieving.
Talk about being a goofy nerd. Anyway,
Nerd.
Our topic of the day literally is Susannah. Susannah has a podcast called Antifragile Tarot. Susannah also co-runs with me a small witchy group. And so our lives, like Susannah's also a dear friend that I've known for a bunch of years, long enough that I already feel old about it. And
over 10 at this point.
Over 10, yeah. So I'm just delighted to have her on the show, and I want to talk about a couple topics that we have in common, because our practices are similar and dissimilar. I think in a lot of ways we have sort of similar views about magic and about belief and things like that, and we also have areas where we diverge, and I thought that would be a little bit interesting to kind of talk about and get another perspective aside from mine, because I'll yammer at you until the end of time if you let me. So one of the things we talking about today is witchy community, the pluses and minuses, and how to find community in your practice and whatever that practice might look like to you. Talk to me, Susannah. How have you found and created witchy community in your life?
So, my introduction to witchcraft is different than a lot of people that I meet because my mom was also very into witchy stuff. So she was kind of that very classic, like, set like 70s to 90s, like neo-pagan, into all of the, let's try everything from all these different pantheons, and, less thought given to potential appropriation than a lot of us are focused on now. Again, not necessarily coming from a harmful place, but just that was kind of the witchy culture of the time. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up, around tarot cards and going to witch stores in New York and all that. And my mom got me my first deck when I was 13. But even having grown up around it, my mom and I were pretty solitary in our practice, or my mom and dad and I, because my dad would participate too. So we were all kind of pretty solitary and to ourselves. It was a lot easier to say I was a Wiccan, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, because that was just the word that everyone knew.
Yep. People understood it.
But it wasn't,
or had an idea about what it was anyway.
Right. They thought they knew what it was. And, as soon as I was old enough to know that Wicca was a particular path and a particular religion within the wider witchcraft umbrella, I was like, well, that's not right. But for me, it was also difficult because when I became an adult, I got out on my own. The friends that I had were, kind of those very staunch, like Richard Dawkins atheist people. like very like anti-theism, none of this crap. And I was still connected to both witchcraft and Judaism, and that was kind of tough. So I kind of just muddled through on my own for a while, uh, picking up tarot cards here and there, doing a spell here and there, nothing really big. But then I guess around like 2015 or so, I started to get more involved. When did we start that witchy group?
That's a good question. I think 2015 sounds right to me, based on where I was living at the time.
It sounds
'Cause
about right to me too.
I remember like dipping my toe back into practices that I hadn't in a lot of years at that time, which was all thanks to Delia, who isn't here today, but it was, Delia Stanley's brainchild. Shout out to Delia Stanley. DeliaStanley.com for art and music.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Delia's fabulous. And I think it was interesting because we started our little witchy group then, but I'd already been in some of the like different kinds of Facebook groups for witchcraft. And a lot of I think there was one that was called the Purple Door or something. And it was all well and good, but it was, again, this is where I think our practices do differ a little bit. It was all very much like earth practice and things that kind of derive from Wicca or kind of feed into the popular perception of Wicca, like calling the corners and using traditional tools. Again, that's great. I'm not knocking it all, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of practice I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I managed to stumble my way into something called the Chaos Magic Group, which I've talked about on my podcast, which was kind of a wild, wild west. Just very like edgy, kind of free for all. But at the same time, if you stuck around and you ignored people who were posting things that were ridiculous, you could really find some very serious, interesting practitioners to talk to.
I find that to be true, especially in chaos magic groups. I also feel like this leads us into a good topic, which is kind of like the intersection of different flavors of witchy. And even the word witchy, you touched on a little bit how it's like a generational thing, that, kind of our mother's generation didn't really think the same way about cultural appropriation. They definitely considered themselves to be on the side of cultural appreciation, even if that wasn't explicitly true. And it really was, I think, one of those things where culturally, when our community started to know better, a lot of us started to do better, And I look at it as like the difference between second wave and third wave feminism to a degree as well. But we do have these differently, amongst the umbrella of like pagan/witchy community, we have like a huge variety of different beliefs and people who feel really staunch about them and people who make fun of them almost with the same level of, like cliquishness that can be present in like high school politics and stuff like that, and some of it's really fun. Some of it leads to like hilarious memes. And some of it feels like a little exclusive. So I guess what I'm asking in all of that is, you, like me, are in several of those different worlds. What does it feel like to you to kind of be in various communities where one part of you is very accepted, one part of you maybe isn't? And what does it look like to you to navigate that?
I've always kind of struggled with fitting into communities. There's just a lot of different things in various parts of my life, not just my spiritual practice, that aren't neatly categorized. And sometimes that is a little distressing or sad, but I've just found that I do better by kind of accepting this is where I'm at, this is what I care about. Let me engage with these communities in a way that's healthy for me and engage with individuals rather than trying to conform myself to the norms of a group that I don't even necessarily want to be a part of. In that sense, the thing I like about the chaos magic groups in particular, although chaos magic is certainly not immune to the same kind of trouble that you were just alluding to of being gatekeeping or exclusive. All subgroups have their norms,
For sure.
even if they even if the whole subgroup is we defy the norm, but there's still norms within that. So the thing about that I was drawn to about chaos magic was that divergence was a little bit more accepted. Again, within certain degrees. So what I've found has been helpful is engaging with individuals rather than the community if the community at large is stressing me out. And also kind of just creating my own community. So our Facebook group, or part of how I got my podcast started was that I realized that there really weren't too many people talking about things in the way that I was looking for. So I kind of wanted to be that place that I was having trouble finding. And I've had people message me saying it's really refreshing to hear someone talk about these topics in a way that's not what we normally hear. And Rorie, I think you do a fabulous job of that with your Discord as well.
Thank you. It's really interesting in the Discord too, because I think in both of our Discords we have people from like really various practices. And I love that. And in our smaller Facebook group that you and I are in too, it's a really good patchwork quilt kind of culture where everyone really respects and is curious about everyone's experience, but there is not a level of, I don't see too much gatekeeping, and I don't see too much, which is kind of beautiful. It's like a beautiful oasis on the internet because that's hard to
it's also because
avoid.
It's smaller. Once a group gets to, thousands of members, I usually check out.
Yeah, I feel that. And it's hard. It's like, it's hard to keep engaged. It's too hard to keep up with. And then there's like a disconcerting sense. I was just thinking about this with a Facebook group I'm in, not a witchy one, just another one that I'm in a community that I'm like, there are undercurrents in this group that I kind of find out about, like that have been going on for weeks. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know because there's 100 posts a day in this group and there's no way I could see them all. So it's weird. Since we've been talking about chaos magic, I would love, because I think some of our listeners are very familiar with different kind of dialectical practices, and some of them are super not necessarily. So I'd love to get a working definition of what does chaos magic mean to you?
Sure. Chaos magic at its very base is accepting that there are different, I'm going to have to break this down further because the words get kind of lofty, but accepting that there are different paradigms, different lenses and approaches to magic, and kind of allowing yourself to experiment with and try different approaches without getting dogmatic about any of them. So you don't have to fully subscribe to any particular path, but if you are doing something in a particular way, then you do need to commit for the duration of that. So I think this would probably make more sense with some examples of what it is and isn't. Yeah. So think about a traditional Hellenistic pagan who worships Hellenistic is Greek, right?
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are
Greek.
Googling.
Totally. 100%. I am not above it. Which will actually lead me into something I do want to touch on as far as community goes. So, a traditional Hellenistic pagan is going to worship the Greek gods. They're going to, or maybe just a couple of them in particular. It's going to do very specific practices relating to those deities. And that's just the lens through which they view their spirituality and how they practice, and that makes and other parts of their life. Whereas a chaos magic practitioner, they may have an altar to some Greek gods. They may draw some inspiration from ceremonial magic, which a lot of people know about more through Aleister Crowley, who, hella problematic, but left a very lasting influence on ceremonial magic. Not just Crowley, though. The Golden Dawn, which is where the Rider-Waite Tarot deck comes from. That's all kind of ceremonial magic. In fact, I thought that chaos magic was ceremonial magic for a really long time. Part of why I never got into it.
I think for some people it is,
For a lot of people it is. But chaos magic is again, kind of an umbrella term that can fit a lot of different practices under its span by definition. I I didn't know this until many years later, but in high school, I kind of stumbled on something called the Principia Discordia, which is something of, it's all online. If you Google it, it's all free. And it's definitely an entertaining read, even if it's not something that you're interested in. But it is hard to see if it was a joke religion or not. It was partially written by someone who was heavy into the psychedelics and spirituality scene, Robert Anton Wilson. And it's about sort of worshiping the goddess of chaos, Eris, or Discordia, but not in a traditional Hellenistic pagan sense. It's, again, it's kind of its own offshoot. And I think I feel like Discordianism really hits at a lot of what chaos magic can be at its best. It's experimentation and choosing a lens to look at the world through, instead of having belief that this is how things are, saying, well, if this is true, then let's do this in this way.
Yeah, I see where you're going. It's interesting because I know a few, I want to say Discordians, and I think people have different levels of like commitment to it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
And it's what's kind of funny to me, and I say this not with disrespect, is that I see a lot of alignment between, people who have read and really enjoyed the Principia Discordia and like people who are fans of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I really don't understand why that in my brain, I'm like, same thing, very different things. But I think it's because there's like a sort of irreverent approach. And there's a real sense of humor around the practice of most Discordian-ish people that I know, which I think is like really refreshing. It's like really nice to see people like taking their beliefs with a grain of salt and allowing them to be something they can laugh about instead of something that like has to be done a certain way or the world is over.
That's what I like best about the pockets of the chaos magic community that I have enjoyed more. But almost like any other practice, when you start taking it too seriously, to me that turns me off. And again, I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but that's where I get turned off from that, especially with practices like chaos magic that are less, how do I put this? I'm thinking of it in contrast with like established religions, like some African and Caribbean religions, where it's very established. There's a lot of history and lineage. It makes sense to take that kind of thing very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But if your religion is partly based off of a psychedelic fueled book that was written, not having a sense of humor about it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to have a little bit of humility and a sense of humor when things go wrong or unexpectedly.
I really like that. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about like the actual craft. What does it look like for you? And as much as you feel comfortable sharing, because I know that some things are, things we feel comfortable talking about in our craft, and some things are like personal just for us. But what does it look like for you to kind of, use all of these different influences in your own practice?
So one thing that's very popular in the chaos magic community is the concept of sigils, which has gotten pretty popularized in the greater magic community over the last few years, I feel. For those who don't know, sigils are when you take a word or a phrase. Usually, there's different approaches to making sigils, but the more traditional one is taking a phrase of intention. So, I don't know, I will make $10,000 in the next year from music. Something like that. Usually that might be even maybe too specific, but something like that. And there's different ways to physically construct your sigils. There's a lot of resources about that on the internet, but the idea behind it is that you use some kind of guide, whether you are using a numerical grid or you are just removing all the vowels and repeating letters. And that leaves you with some smaller number of letters to construct some kind of image with. And there's a million different approaches to making sigils and how to activate them. Some people do it by burning. Some people do it through some physical means. But there's all sorts of different ways to go about this. So sigils are a very popular practice in chaos magic. And I incorporate sigils. I haven't done a sigil in a hot minute, actually. But I've had some very startling results with them. I do a lot of candle magic, which vibes with me both for witchy reasons and for Jewish reasons. You know, there's a lot of candles in Judaism, and that always feels very, very magical to me. Actually, I had to dig into my Shabbat candle stash because I realized I had 0 ritual candles yesterday, and I needed one urgently. So that was funny. But there's nothing sacred about Shabbat candles. You can pick them up in the supermarket. Like, they're not some holy object I'm desecrating. They're just candles. They just need to burn for a certain amount of time to be able to be used for the Sabbath. So I do a lot of candle magic. I do some private work with deities that I don't discuss as much publicly. But I mostly, if I'm working with any spiritual forms, it's rarely deities. I work a lot with the 40 Servants by someone I met from the Chaos Magic group, Tommy Kelly.
40 Servants are awesome, and so is Tommy Kelly.
Are super cool. Yeah, Tommy Kelly's awesome, and I met Tommy through Chaos Magic group. I met a few really good people, really solid people through that group, even though I was never particularly active, and I haven't been active there in a few years. So I do a lot of work with the 40 Servants because they are concepts and ideas and sometimes personifications of an intent or a need, but they're not gods. And for my own practice, that makes more sense because I'm pretty agnostic about that. What else do I do? And I mean, tarot, but I do still view tarot as I usually fall in the more psychological realm with tarot.
You and I both have this kind of push and pull around what we do and don't believe that I think doesn't align with a lot of people's views of like what a pagan person is or what a witch person is, you know. And I think a lot of the ways we align just came out in what you said, you know, about like here's how I view tarot. It's more of a psychological tool. You mentioned working with deities as someone who's also agnostic, and I would love to hear like what that looks like for you, not in a particular way that you don't feel like discussing, but just how that practice feels and evolves for you as someone who is like, my belief is still up in the air on this topic. I'm not necessarily, you know, doing this for anyone but me.
Well, for that, I mean, again, that stuff that can, and not to say, oh, this is personal, I can't talk about it, but I feel like I don't want it to at all sound like I think there's like a right way to do any of this. Like this thing, it's just people kind of have to figure out on their own for themselves. For me, it all very much falls into that chaos magic perspective of when I am working with that energy and that particular form, how are they honored? What is the best thing I can do to honor, for example, Guan Yin, the goddess / bodhisattva of compassion and mercy, who has a really interesting folklore if you look into their folklore, because they are canonically, well, I guess canonically is not the right word, but there's literature to support that Guan Yin is gender fluid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but most often portrayed as a woman. And again, that also depends on if this is, you know, Tibetan or Japanese or Chinese, because she's a Chinese folk goddess, but there's also Tibetan and Japanese versions. So you know, for me, if I'm honoring a deity, it's giving them specific offerings that are for them. It's also something that I'm struggling with a little more because I have been getting a little bit more religiously Jewish. So there's a lot of different approaches in Judaism to the idea of more than one god or goddess. And some people say, oh no, you can't even acknowledge the existence. And some people say, well, it's the Jewish god form above any others.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that the others can't exist, but that, just you need to be mindful that you're not idolizing, anyone else over this concept. So, because God in Judaism is not Christian Sky Daddy. No offense to any Christians listening. No offense meant at all, but it's a completely different concept. And part of what kept me away from exploring Judaism more was American culture, American Christian hegemony specifically, really conflates Christianity and Judaism as far as religious beliefs. Like, oh, Judaism is just Christianity without the New Testament. And it's not. But there, one community that is very small, but I really have enjoyed spending more time with is Jewitches.
Nice.
So Jewish witches. There's a few different groups. I don't spend a lot of time on Discord personally, but I know that Discord is a really great place for people to go. So I think there's a Jewish Discord I'm part of that I haven't participated in much. But again, kind of linking back to what we were saying earlier, I know that these are somewhat common practices among a lot of chaos magic practitioners, the sigils, the candles, alternative objects of devotion. For instance, pop culture magic is a big thing. I think it was you who got me a Buffy prayer candle.
I think that was me. I think I saw it and I was like, Susannah.
I still haven't burned it. It's still an altar piece. So I think these are all things that are very common, but I've also still kind of remained a little bit aloof. So it can be hard for me to say, oh, this is pretty standard chaos magician fare versus this is just me.
Yeah. Which is, I think, healthy. You know what I mean? I think part of chaos magic is a choose your own adventure mentality. And the other thing that often comes to mind when I think of chaos magic is using belief as a tool, which is something I'm big into. Which I like because it acknowledges that belief can be fluid, that belief doesn't have to be like, here are the, it's not science where we have like, this is a real fact and we can't pretend it's not real because we have observed it. It's something where we have more flexibility. And a little bit like the choose your own adventure thing, I think can be very healthy for people. Just in a psychological way, when we talk about limiting beliefs versus more empowering beliefs. And certainly as you and I, as people who I don't think ascribe particularly one way or another around the existence of certain things and what's happening behind the scenes, but can fully engage with what we're doing in that moment. And maybe,
yes.
And I might just be speaking for me. That's okay.
No, completely. And I think that is, and you said it very succinctly, belief as a tool. I think that is kind of the underlying thing. And that might sound offensive to people who have very sincerely held and felt beliefs regarding their pantheon. And,
Yeah.
it's definitely not meant, again, some chaos magicians get real obnoxious about this, but it's not meant to say that that's a bad approach, but for those of us who don't vibe with that, there's still an approach where we can find spiritual meaning and fulfillment.
Yes. And I think like with many other practices, there's a way to engage respectfully and a way to engage disrespectfully. I certainly think with using different pantheons, as so many people in the pagan community do, there's a way to think about that of like, are these appropriate entities and energies for me to be working with personally? And I think about this for me a lot as like a white woman of European heritage, and I do think that comes into play in chaos magic as well. I don't think chaos magic is immune to it, where we have let's come around to that topic about like, I don't want to say appropriation versus appreciation because I think it oversimplifies it. I think it's like actually really complex and nuanced. But what does it look like to you as someone who owns several cultures, like who is actively and or inactively a part of, like, heritage from several cultures, and also is not necessarily, but there are still possibly other elements in your practice. Like, tell me what that looks like for you, like navigating that line.
Also, as I mentioned, I'm Jewish. I do have Mexican heritage, which may actually be Spanish heritage. I think I don't have any. I don't have much good data on my father's side of the family, because that my father's side, which is where the Goya comes from in my name. But I suspect that they were Spanish Jews who fled to Mexico because Mexico was very open to Jewish immigrants when a lot of the world wasn't. I suspect that's where that came from. But I'm still pretty white. And oh, my video just stopped. There we go. Yay. Sorry about that. But for me, I have found that the best ways to engage in other practices are to go right to the source, which I think that as much as I love having online communities, and especially for people who may need to be more secretive about their practice, or maybe in a very remote location, or may have disability or mobility issues, having online community can be a real lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it's the internet and anyone can say anything.
Yes.
So I think it's very, very important that if you're engaging primarily in online communities, that you still, this phrase has really gotten away from me with the whole pandemic, but do your research, but make sure that your research sources are as legitimate as they can be. So, people say don't trust Wikipedia. I actually think that Wikipedia can be a great jumping off point if you go down to the sources on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
That way you can look at them and say, hey, is this from some random blog? Or is this information from a serious source of history or other information? So, there's certain practices I just do not touch with a 10-foot pole. And I have friends who do practice them, and I think it's, and it's great. And they're happy to discuss with me. I had an entity from a closed practice kind of pop up in my life. And I was like, I don't know what to do about this. Let me talk to my friends who practice this. And they helped me engage with that entity in a way that would be respectful, but also not appropriative.
I really love that, because that was going to be a question I was going to ask. Are there things that you don't feel are appropriate for you to practice, and what do you do when that occurs? So thank you for bringing it up now.
Oh, I mean, lots of things. There's so many things that just aren't mine to touch, and that's okay, because there's a plenty wide world of spirituality for me to engage in.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to learn more about them, I can. There's a whole internet full of ways to find good sources. But again, it's being mindful of vetting your sources. Are you just talking to some random person online, or are you looking up real history and real accounts from practitioners? Some practices are just going to be very closed. Some practices are mostly done in private, and that's not even just culturally protected practices. Some witches and pagans are very private about their practices. So no, you're not necessarily going to know everything, but that's what experience is for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a lot of us can kind of become armchair pagans or armchair magicians. And I think you kind of have to strike that balance between, all right, here I'm going to research this to see if it's something I'm interested in, to see if it's something that's appropriate for me to participate in. But then you also have to go and do something.
Yeah. If you want to. I mean, you can be a book witch, like, it's valid to be like, I'm going to read, I'm going to be excited by this, But I think usually if you have the interest, you want to practice in some way.
I mean, this is my take of the day, not to be gatekeepy, but it's also okay to not identify as a witch, to still be very interested in learning about it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Like you
that's
can
true.
you can be a librarian, and that's fabulous. We need some of those. In fact, if you're not practicing but you are interested, that could make you a more unbiased source.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, Leading me into another question. Talk to me about your practices with tarot. We're both tarot readers, and it's kind of funny that we've talked about everything but on this interview, which
I
I'm
feel
here
like that's what
for.
happens with my podcast too. I
Yeah,
kind of started my podcast as a tarot podcast, and most of my episodes are about every other witchy topic under the sun.
same here.
I'm getting back into it though. I'm actually in the process of recording an episode that several patrons have uh, requested about cards that pair together.
Hmm.
So my tarot practices, as I said, my mom got me my first deck when I was 13, and I would read on and off all throughout high school. A lot of my memories from those years are not intact because I was going through a lot emotionally and everything in those years. So there's a lot of memories that are just gone because of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have some evidence from like emails I sent and like some old some notebooks I found where I was doing a lot more tarot than I actively remember doing, which is kind of funny to look back on. And I kind of read on and off. I got back into it despite my very atheist friends when I was in my early 20s. And then in my mid 20s, my mother passed away and I inherited her tarot decks. So Rorie has at least, no, Rorie, I think you have my grandmother's deck.
I do have your grandmother's deck.
You have my grandmother's deck. And a bunch of my friends have mother's decks. I think I only have one deck that actually belonged to her left in my possession. And I got much more seriously into tarot at that point. I was like, well, I have all these decks. I should do something with them. And prior to that, I did do some reading for myself. But when I got seriously into tarot, I found that I really enjoyed reading for other people. And I was just doing it for fun, for online and in person for free. And I just had so much demand to do it where I'm like, well, I'm going to have to start charging everybody money now because this is just too much. I still chronically undercharged for several years. As it stands right now, I haven't been doing as much tarot card reading because I am also an emergency room nurse. And it's been a heck of a year and a half for anyone who's in the medical field, but particularly in the emergency room. So I've had to take a big step back from tarot. But I am getting a little bit more into it now that things are, at least in New Jersey, are leveling out a little bit. I still primarily read for other people, though, because I find that I'm my own worst enemy all the time with everything, hence the therapist.
Hence the Nine of Swords following you around.
It really is. It gets old when you're doing a reading and you get the 10 of Wands and the 9 of Swords and the Tower all the time. It's like, yeah, I get it. Thanks. So I don't read for myself that often. And not because I don't want to hear what it has to say or I don't think it's going to be accurate, but just because I'm not even sure I'm the best person to interpret for myself because I am going to look at it in the harshest possible light, which is not a healthy trait, and I'm working on it, but I don't need to hammer that in with tarot. But I still very much enjoy reading for other people. And when I'm reading, there are certain subjects I will not read on. I don't do any medical diagnoses. On occasion, I will do what can I do to support, my health or support my recovery from this surgery or whatever. But that's something that I have to really negotiate with whoever I'm reading for. Like, I need you to understand this does not replace or supersede the advice of your doctor.
Yeah.
My nurse hat and my tarot card reader hat are very different. I do not wear the nurse hat when reading cards.
Maybe if it's Halloween.
Maybe, but even then
but then
not.
that's not really a costume because you really are a nurse. So
I don't do that. I don't do any readings on pregnancies at this point.
Oh, I don't blame you. Which is also a medical reading, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just feel like I did do one that went okay because that person was also a tarot card reader, and we had a very lengthy discussion about it. But that's probably the last one I will ever do, because I feel like if you do a reading for somebody and it's bad, even if everything is okay, that's going to be hanging over their head. And I don't need that.
I think that too. And I think it can
They
affect
don't
free
need
will.
that.
No, they don't.
No,
And
I
in
don't. I
both
don't need that
ways.
responsibility as a reader. And someone who is pregnant and literally doing one of the hardest things that a human body can do really doesn't need that.
Yeah, they don't need one more layer of what they have to worry about to do pregnancy right, because they're getting that advice from everywhere.
The other, I've also had to turn people away who want soulmate or twin flame readings, because that's, again, it's just not part of my belief system. No disrespect meant. It's just not something that I do, so I wouldn't be the most appropriate reader.
Yeah.
I will never forget one time I was doing a reading for somebody, and I think she started asking me if I was a psychic or a medium, and I'm like, no, I'm really sorry. I don't work with spirits in that way. We sat down and did a reading, and she was asking about her brother, and I think I said something about him being lost or far away, and she's like, oh yeah, he's been dead for like 6 years.
Welp. I have
And I
had
was
that
just like,
experience too. The accidental, we're doing a reading about someone who has passed on and I didn't know.
I was personally pretty salty about it, because I had pretty much made it clear to her. It's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. It's like, surprise, now you're doing it.
Yeah.
She was a good sport though. I wasn't that mad about it. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I think part of why I took such a big step back from reading during the pandemic was that a lot of people were in very desperate situations, and I was getting a lot of requests for, when am I going to get a job?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I personally don't do very predictive readings like that. I know some people do. Some people are more comfortable doing readings like, this is exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen in the next 6 months to, a month time frame. And that's just not something I feel comfortable with. What I do wind up doing a lot of readings on is, how can I best approach this situation? Or I have 2 options. And, you would think it would be a lot more romantic readings, but it's mostly job readings.
Yeah. That's funny too. I think once you've been reading a little bit, people get to know who you are as a reader, and that influences who's coming to you and what questions they have, like who you're drawing to you.
Online, yes, but I do a lot of my tarot reading for years was at events.
Oh, that's true.
So I would just be at an event. I'd have my tarot table set up, and I did get repeat customers frequently, but and a lot of it was just people who were coming by. My favorite is always reading for kids.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I've ever read for like a child. Like I've read for teenagers.
I've had like kids who are like 8 to 10 years old with their parents, obviously, and they look interested. And the parents are like, "Can you read for them?" So I always make sure I have a kid appropriate deck with me,
That's good.
just in
Yeah.
case.
That's kind of charming. I definitely had my grandmother read for me when I was a kid. And she definitely read for me a little differently. She was very cognizant of, like, I think not just I was a kid, but I was her granddaughter, and there was a lot of protectiveness. And I think she herself didn't want to see anything that was going to stress her out about me.
My favorite story in that vein was my mom did a reading for me. I was 9 years old. She did a reading for me. I remember she was sitting on the bed. She pulls out, I think it was Rider-Waite. And she pulls out, she pulls the cards, and the 9 of Swords pops up. And she looks at it and she goes, nope, and packs up the whole thing.
And it's the Nine of Swords.
Yep. I remembered that. That's why that card has followed me. And I think a month later, I was involved in a really bad car accident. I had a broken leg, and it was a whole thing. So, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, I can't blame her.
My mom had finished that. I don't know if my mom would have read differently for me had she actually finished it, because my mother was not the protective type. But she did just look at that and go, nope, we're not doing this.
Never mind. This is closed. I want to move into Witch You Got This and talk about some strategies around finding and creating witchy community for yourself. I also want to open to anyone watching in the comments right now, which I think is one human. Savannah, hi.
Thanks, Savannah.
If anyone has any questions for Susannah about her practice or about just, her perspective on something, please drop those questions in the chat. We would love to avail ourselves of Susannah's brain while it's here. Because I certainly have been. But in the meantime, let's go to Witch, You Got This. Savannah says, hey guys. Savannah's great. Savannah's energy is just great. There's always like good emojis in the chat, and it just feels like someone cares. So let's talk about Witch You Got This, which is my portion of the podcast where I talk about one super easy, practical way to expand on some of the ideas of the podcast episode. And today I want to talk about finding witchy community for yourself. Susannah and I talked a little bit about community both online and offline. And also I want to talk about how to find the right witchy community, because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of different belief systems, and I don't want to just say belief systems, but I also want to say like different, as you said, Susannah, like kind of trends in different groups, different group norms or whatever. But there's also just different, like styles of human being. And it's like, you want to find the right thing for you and your personality that's going to enrich your practice rather than stress you out about it. So what tips do you have for going after witchy community for oneself, Sus?
So I think starting in person will probably be easier and shorter because I have some very specific recommendations for online. As far as finding witchy communities in person, I think if you have any friends nearby, obviously asking them, hey, where do you go to get supplies? And sometimes, they may just say the supermarket. That's just
right.
Me though.
I'm there. But I'm dollar store.
But sometimes there are witch shops, and if you go to those witchy stores, sometimes they will have advertisements for open circles or book clubs and things like that are run through that store. So even if this, obviously if it's like a Botanica, maybe that's not the right place for you. But if it's one of those, like New York City has Enchantments, which has been there for most of my lifetime, if not longer. I've been going there since I was a kid. And if you join their mailing list or you go into the store, obviously pre-COVID, they had advertisements for their monthly circles. And that could be a good way to go and meet other people who you may or may not vibe with. But at least it's a way to get your foot in that door. As far as other in-person methods, I don't really have much else for you there. Just if you have any witchy friends, talk to them. If there's any local stores, even if they don't seem like they're totally 100% your practice, it's still worth seeing what they have to offer because you might be surprised.
Yeah. I'll also say that online can be a gateway to local. I definitely am in a couple of, there are definitely like witchy groups on Facebook or whatever that are focused on a particular geographic area, So I've definitely found like I'm on Long Island in New York, some Long Island based stuff that is local that I physically drove my car to that I wouldn't have found without, having seen it online or whatever.
That's good. Also Reddit is actually a surprisingly good resource for a lot of things. I know Reddit gets a lot of flack on the internet, but for specific niche interests or, interests, hobbies, professions, anything like that, there's actually, as long as you're staying away from the big public popular subreddits, there can be a lot of great things. So either there's a couple of communities I do want to discuss, but even going on one for your city, if your city is big enough.
Yeah.
The great thing about Reddit is that it's anonymous. So if you're worried about posting on Facebook with your, real profile and someone finding out, Reddit's completely anonymous. So you can just make a burner account that has no personal information and you can ask there if other people finding out about what you're doing is a concern.
Yeah, and there are people who have that concern, and like rightly so. There are people who, whatever, fear being ostracized by their community or their parents if they're, still living under their parents' roof or what have you. That's really helpful. I really think it's valuable to be able to anonymously gather information. I also, let's talk about pitfalls as well, because I think that there are also, things to be concerned about in the witchy community, as with any community you try to get into. I don't want to. Sometimes people have like a really black and white view of it. People have like the view of like, oh, nothing bad could ever happen in our special pagan community. And there are also people who kind of still have spooky vibes about the witchy community who are like, oh, you want to watch out for those people. I think neither is quite right, But I do think anytime you're trying to get into a community, you risk becoming engaged with people who may be predatory. We definitely had like a little pagan Me Too moment around the time that everyone else did, and it was real and important and amazing to watch people inside our otherwise close-knit community do the same thing they do everywhere, which is like, no, it's not, but in this case, the woman must be lying. And, so what are some tips you would share with people to kind of, like, protect themselves, as they seek out new community around this, especially with perhaps a fledgling belief system if they're just beginning to explore this?
I think something to be cognizant of is who is running whatever you're looking into, whether that's an online group or an in-person community, especially if you are aligned with any marginalized identities yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, a lot of pagan communities can be very racist.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them can be, and obviously sexist. There's also still some pockets that are homophobic. Especially in some older pagan communities, there's a lot of this idea of duality and male and female, and that can be really alienating.
Mm-hmm.
So, being mindful of always keeping your safety first, and no one should ever tell you that you have to disavow part of your identity to join in on their circle. That's a big red flag right there. Or, we don't talk about politics or we don't talk about race here. That's a big red flag too.
Right. If it's not an open conversation, it means that when there is really a problem, that it's going to get swept under the rug.
I will say, like, sometimes I don't see this as often as I see people complaining about it, but I have seen it where people will make conversation more political or bring up a kind of whataboutism on a completely unrelated subject. This is more pertaining to online than in person.
Mm-hmm.
That is a thing that can happen, and a good moderator is going to say, well, I appreciate that input, but that's really not the topic here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really seeing, was that actually off topic, or was that an actual criticism that you're trying to sweep under the rug by saying, well, that's off topic?
Yes.
So I think those are things to look out for. And also just remembering that it's okay to not agree 100% with what other people in the community are saying.
Yeah. It can be healthy if you have a group with the right kind of herd mentality. I know that people generally use that phrase in a negative way, and I understand why, but if the kind of overall group think is one that is more of the patchwork quilt versus the melting pot mentality, and more, we appreciate and are curious about everyone and also want to be respectful, then it's really healthy. It can be really healthy to learn about practices that are adjacent to yours or perhaps even have nothing to do with yours. It's very enriching, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I find that I'm pretty good at avoiding groupthink and avoiding over idolizing one particular member or leader. But for someone who is newer or kind of dipping their toe in a community, some people are very charismatic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you may feel that they have more influence than they really do. And just, being mindful of, it's great to find community, and obviously there are going to be leaders and there are going to be followers, but making sure that you feel secure in expressing your own beliefs and your own path without feeling like that's going to be a problem with the leader.
Yes. I think I also have seen instances where someone got very involved in kind of discover their spirituality, through a community group. And then when there's a problem with that group, they face this kind of harmful thing, and completely outside the pagan community. Like, I definitely saw a lot of Catholics go through this as, as a lot of things came out about pedophilia within the ranks of the Catholic Church. And, and then arriving at a place of like, okay, there's a problem in my community, but this is also my spiritual practice and it means a great deal to me. And can I have one without the other? And I like kind of want to assure people, like, yes, you can. Like, the only path to access your spirituality and the important, things that you're developing in your life doesn't have to be through a community that is harmful or problematic. If you find your community harmful or problematic, I promise you there's another one out there that's going to not be that way for you.
I think it's harder with Catholicism, and it may be harder with certain more structured forms of paganism.
Mm-hmm.
That do rely on that structure and potentially scriptures, specific rituals, and even lifestyle situations. I think it can be harder for people to pivot in that way. Whereas with your more, spiritual but not religious people, which I think a lot of people are currently drawn to, witchcraft and magical practices kind of fall a little bit more under. Mm-hmm. That's a much easier transition to make.
I think so too. I think there's a personality aspect of it as well. And I know we have a lot of people in our community who came out of organized religion looking for something that worked for them better, whether it was like less problematic or a practice that felt more accessible or kinder or whatever, which is not me trashing on organized religion and saying it's not those things necessarily.
But there are good reasons that people leave organized religion.
Yeah, and yet there are still plenty of people, I think, within like the pagan witchy community who benefit from the type of spiritual practice that is structured and is social, and specifically I think that's the personality type who is at risk for situations where, okay, what happens if I learn a community member is problematic? What happens if I learn, that there's something about this group that was so beneficial to me a few weeks ago that now feels uncomfortable and like I'm being asked for something that is not appropriate. And it can feel really scary because if community is a big part of your practice, like losing the community is losing your practice. And the beautiful thing about the witchy community is it's like there's so much room for fluidity. You can always find a community practice, and even if it's as simple as like, I do want this structure, I do want this kind of social structure around my spirituality, I'll find another circle, like even if it's something like that, it's very accessible. So do you have any specific communities you might recommend online if people are interested in any of the topics we've discussed today?
So the biggest one that I would like to signal is something called Sass Witches, SassWitches on Reddit. Mm-hmm. So I believe that would be reddit.com/r/SassWitches, all one word.
I'm going to put this in the show notes too for everyone.
Fabulous. It is specifically for the description of this group is a place for skeptic, agnostic, atheist, and generally science-seeking folk to share memes, support one another, and develop rituals. We welcome folk of any, all, and no genders.
I love it.
So for someone who is really much more on my side of being more agnostic, not necessarily following any particular belief system, who has a very nebulous concept of what deity practice, working with gods and goddesses might look like to them, they can be a really interesting place to see what witchcraft can look like without a deity or god or goddess centered focus. That's one
lovely
place I
and
think is
needed.
really useful. And let me see the Chaos Magic one. I haven't been there in a while. The Chaos Magic, Chaos Magick, has a lot of interesting information for people who are interested in the concept of chaos magic. It is magic with a K, a la Crowley, and a lot of people are shying away from using K because Crowley was a bunch of problematic things wrapped up in a trench coat.
Yes.
But I like this particular subreddit. I think it has a lot of really useful information, and it's been pretty straightforward as far as looking for both actual information, but also people sharing their experiences as practitioners. I will not suggest the Discordian subreddit because it is that particular flavor of Discordian that is basically just random equals chaos, and it's like, no, that's not quite right in my belief system as far as Discordianism goes. So yeah, I think the chaos magic and sass witches are really good if the topics that we discussed in this podcast have piqued your interest.
I love it. I will add that I found some real community. Part of the reason I'm a podcaster and part of the reason this is a Witchy podcast is because I found a lot of community in my practice from listening to Witchy podcasts. And it is really like a close-knit world, and now a lot of people do have Patreons, and I'm a patron of a few different witchy podcasts that I really enjoy listening to, and some of the conversations in those groups have been very, very really nice, really eye-opening. Again, you do get that diversity of different beliefs, but a little bit because it's all around a podcast, people tend to be a little nicer than they are on Facebook, a little more respectful. And the two that I'm in that I really enjoy on Discord are Joanna DeVoe's server. Joanna DeVoe has the Hippie Witch podcast and has a huge, awesome Discord full of people that I really enjoy. In fact, I think Savannah, the way I met you was from Joanna's server. I might be wrong, but that's a great server. And the Adventures in Woo Woo Discord server is also super active, super interesting. And
that is Tommy Kelly.
That is Tommy Kelly. Yeah.
Yes.
And Tommy Kelly's awesome. Great last name, of course, but no relation. But Tommy Kelly is like, I recommend his podcast. I recommend his worldview because there is a lot of that concept of like take this as it enriches you or don't. And here's my beliefs and experiences, and yours don't have to align in his whole persona, which I really enjoy. Yeah, and if you're looking for witchy community anywhere, it can be as simple as like choosing the social media site you enjoy the most, whether it is, I don't know if you would call Reddit like social media. I would say it is. It's like forums.
I would absolutely say it's social media. Also Tumblr.
Yeah.
If you want some aesthetic, you want more pictures, Tumblr can be fun. But again, the whole thing with any of these forums is remembering two things. Remembering that there is a human being on the other side of that screen. Mm-hmm. If you ever get the urge to go off, unless someone's being, a bigot, in which case, by all means.
Yep.
But also remembering that people can say whatever they want. So if you're, if someone says, oh, this is how you do this belief, this is how you do this ritual, unless they created the ritual themselves, it's probably worth looking up another resource.
And I do see a lot in kind of the huge witch groups, whether it's, on whatever, social media or forum you might be on. I see people come in with questions who obviously don't necessarily have a background. Either they're new and they're, wanting to learn, or they're people who are a little bit spooked and like, uh, you know, people come in with a question like, is someone casting a spell on me? And I see a wide variety of answers. I see answers vary from people who are clearly like, yes, someone is casting a spell on you and you need protection, to people who are like, hey, you know what? Like, you might just be having a bad week. And so I just encourage people, like, please take any information you get on any of those groups with a grain of salt. As Susannah says, anyone can say anything. Anyone can say they are anyone, And what really matters is, if you have a genuine concern or fear about something, then that's all the more reason to be careful and do research and try to arrive at a reputable source as you explore it, rather than taking advice from a stranger on the internet. But to know that, like, what some random person on the internet says about your practice does not have to be the end of the story. You're allowed,
Yes.
you're allowed to diverge. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to think different things.
I could not agree more with that idea. Like, at the end of the day, community is great, and there are certain rituals or practices or belief systems that heavily rely on having community there, from the minyan in Judaism, where you need a certain number of people to say certain bits of liturgy and do certain rituals, or circles that may require a certain number of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's all well and good, but except for those specific instances, I feel like you should take what other people have to say and see if that vibes with your worldview or makes you want to research it. But at the end of the day, your practice is your practice alone.
Yes.
And it's
Unless
more
you want
important
it to
that
be
your
community-tastic. Some people do
yes.
relate that way,
Sure. But at the end of the day, it's still your practice. And the community should serve you. I mean, you should serve your community, but you shouldn't change a lot about your belief system or your person just to serve a community. If you find that you feel like you have to make all these changes and not, oh wow, this is actually a potentially harmful practice, maybe I should change that. Like, maybe this is appropriative, or maybe this is harmful in some way. But if you're like, oh wow, this group says I'm using the wrong candles, or I need XYZ equipment, or I can't wear this style of clothing. Like, if they're asking you to change more things than you feel comfortable changing, that don't feel meaningful to you, then maybe it's time to find a different group and not necessarily change your practice.
And I encourage you to find groups that don't ridicule asking questions. There's definitely there is gatekeeping in all different parts of the witchy community. People use the term fluffy bunny, for like baby witch, like things like that. And I think all of those are terms we should own. Like I think that we need to have room to encourage people who are just beginning and just exploring. And there's a real tendency sometimes for someone who's been in the community a while to be like, oh, I see, you saw the craft, so now you think you're a witch. And, maybe that was some people's gateway into a spirituality that became very meaningful to them. Like, let's allow people to like things. Let's allow people to be newbies.
I use the term woo, and I think because a lot of people do use it so disparagingly, I think some people thought I was only using it disparagingly. I'm like, I'll talk about my own woo all day. Let's go.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
I got woo. I don't do a lot of woo professionally, but I certainly have got my own woo. And I think this circles back to a couple of things. I think saying about not taking ourselves so seriously. I think that's a really big thing, both for beginners, but also for advanced people.
Yeah.
Like recognizing that we all have things to learn, but we also all have things to teach. Sometimes having someone who isn't as familiar with the groupthink or the mores or norms of the group, or even of the whatever it is that's being studied or discussed, that can bring some new thought and perspective, and that can be so valuable.
It really can. It can like be dramatically eye-opening. I definitely have had experiences, like a couple of people, I don't do like classes on the tarot, but a couple of people have said, will you teach me the tarot? And I've had a couple of experiences where a conversation with someone who had never done more than look at a deck of tarot cards and thought it was pretty, gave me some insight that then became a real piece of like something that I referred back to in my practice, you know, like a
Absolutely.
really exciting wrinkle. Cool. So what I'd like to do now is let everyone know where they can find you on the internet. Where can we find you on the internet, Susannah?
So the best place to find me is wherever you listen to podcasts. I am very easily findable on Spotify. So that would be the Antifragile Tarot podcast. Antifragile is all one word. I'm on Spotify, but I'm on pretty much any other podcasting service. So Apple, Google, Stitcher, whatever you listen to podcasts on, chances are you'll be able to find me. I do have a Patreon as well. That would be patreon.com/antifragiletarot. And that goes to support the podcast going up, with like hosting costs, any money I throw to anyone I interview, because I do pay people who come on my podcast. And I also am working on getting my episodes transcribed for people people with auditory issues. So that's going to go on a website soon. A website is coming. But you can also follow me on Instagram. I am Antifragile Tarot. And I tweet very infrequently at Antifragile Card, because Antifragile Tarot was too long for the Twitters. Someday I will have my Etsy back up. I think I actually closed my shop for now. That will be Antifragile Tarot as well. Someday it will open back up. Right now is not that day.
Thank you. I'm going to put all of those links into the show notes. So everyone who is not like literally watching this in real time, you can find it in the show notes accompanying this episode. I want to share where people can find me and take us out with a song. But first I want to ask Susannah, is there anything you want to share with people? Any words of wisdom or words of whimsy that you wish to impart with our viewers?
Well, first, I just want to thank you again for having me on. It's always a great time to chat with you, but it's also really nice to do so with an actual focus instead of just shooting the breeze.
Focus is a big word for our conversation today.
This is about as focused as my podcasts ever get. So, no.
Yeah, same.
But I also just want to remind everyone who's listening that it's just own your own practice. Just embrace where you are, embrace where you might be, embrace where you have been. We all grow and change as people. Our lives change, and our practices may change too. For some people, our practice may be the one constant bedrock in your life you can turn to, and it's wonderful. But if that does change, try to embrace it the same way that you would embrace change in a friend or a lover.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Embrace your practice, everybody. Hug it out. I'm going to share with you a few places that you can find Sassafras Tarot and SassafrasCast on the internet. If you enjoy this podcast, know that you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Leaving a rating and or a review wherever you listen to podcasts is really helpful. It helps people find the podcast. And if you could take a moment to share it with someone who might be interested, I would be very grateful. If you would like to support this podcast financially and unlock exclusive benefits like backstage passes every time I record an episode of the podcast, for various levels of support, bonus episodes, monthly card pulls, and just kind of whatever comes into my head, because I like to share whatever I can with my patrons, you can do so at patreon.com/SassafrasTarot for $1 per month or more. You should also know that Susannah has a Patreon, which I am a part of and sincerely recommend. It's a really good group of humans at patreon.com/antifragiletarot. Patrons, my patrons get, I just said this, I'm reading my own thing and I'm getting confused. If you have a question, idea, or suggestion, you can email me anytime at sassafrastarot@gmail.com. You can follow me on social media at Sassafras Tarot on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you would like to order a reading, you can do so at etsy.com/shop /Sassafras Tarot. As always, I'm going to take you out with a song. I put my guitar so far away from me. And Susannah picked the song for today. Susannah has requested, and I put her on the spot. I'm like, what song am I going to play today? Susannah has requested...
I thought this was very appropriate.
I feel so. I feel like it's kind of appropriate for our friendship. I don't have anything to back that up. I just feel that way. So this is a song called Liminal Spaces. If you enjoy it, you can find my music on the internet by searching my name on your favorite music site, Rorie Kelly, RORIE KELLY, or visit my website, roriekelly.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Susannah, for coming on the show and classing up the joint. And
Sure, okay.
This song is called Liminal Spaces, and I'm going to take you out on it. I hope this is a song about liminal spaces. A liminal space is a space between thresholds, doorways.
Target stores.
The back rooms.
Having worked in retail for a long time, those stock rooms are absolutely 100% liminal spaces.
1,000,000%. So this is a song about liminal spaces. I wrote it during lockdown, which was one big liminal space, and in a way continues to be, as I believe today is like March 231st, 2020. That's what my last time I checked. Anyway, should you find yourself in a liminal space in confusion, I hope this song is a balm to your heart. I have a thing for liminal spaces. I get stuck inside them for ages. When you observe a particle, the particle changes. But no one's understanding when I change too. If you're looking, I had a book of dreams on my nightstand. I always thought that I'd come back for it. I had to prove I could do it my way. I had to prove that I could make rent. If you just believed me the first time, it wouldn't have been so hard for me. Where are the moon sisters I was promised? Where is the music monk I never got to be? 'Cause I got stuck chasing love from somebody. 'Cause I got stuck trying to chase money. I have a thing for piano players. I try to learn from the things I'm drawn to. I try to learn from the moth inside me likes this particular flame, so I don't get burned again. I have a notebook, so many it's embarrassing. I have a lot to say for someone so quiet. People think that she's a stuck-up bitch until they get to know me. And by the time they get to know me, I'm attached even if it's wrong. Where are the Knight of Cups I was promised? I went all in, and all I got was this lousy discernment. 'Cause I got stuck chasing love from somebody. 'Cause I got stuck trying to chase money. It's too late now. You can never take it back. It's too late now. You can never get the years back. It's too late now. And the future looks exhausting. Where are the broken but good-hearted people? I feel myself changing into something I don't like. 'Cause I got stuck chasing love from somebody. 'Cause I got stuck trying to chase money. I have a thing for liminal spaces. I get stuck inside them for ages. When you observe the particle changes. No one understands the particle that I become. This is recorded live. Any mistakes you experience are what you get. But you can hear a mistake-free version of that song on Spotify if you search for my name, Rorie Kelly. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for spending time with us today. I can't wait to get to do this with you again next month. I'm not sure what the topic of next month will be or when I'll be recording it, but I release these episodes about once a month, and that is the best schedule I can possibly make myself stick to. So, until next time, my friends, farewell, farewell. Mwah. Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of SassafrasCast, which I might have to restart because one of my patrons is saying the link isn't working, it's private. Oh my god, I'm the worst person. Let's see. Yeah, video unavailable. This video is private. Awesome. I'm gonna fix that right now. We'll be restarting the broadcast, but hang tight, people who aren't watching, because apparently I sent a private link to everyone. I'm amazing. Okay, well...
It's just my chaotic influence.